And now Venezuela has kicked off 2 days of military drills in the wake of recent tensions between Caracas and Washington.
The Venezuelan Bolivarian National Armed Forces will accompany all the measures to counterattack the sanctions, the financial blockade and all the tricks they're going to do. The threat that we are sure they will make against weak governments of the region and worldwide to try to stifle Venezuela.
The war games were ordered by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro following threats and economic sanctions from the White House. Earlier this month, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened Caracas with military action over what Washington calls Maduro's authoritarian rule over the country. Trump's remarks sparked anger among the people of Venezuela and some other Latin American nations. Maduro says the U.S. is plotting to remove him to get a hold of Venezuela's huge natural reserves. Oil-rich nation has been witnessing economic problems and political tensions since crude prices began to fall back in 2015. More than 100 people were killed in violent anti-government protests in the past 3 months. Joining us for more on the story now out of Sao Paulo is Shoban Saxena, journalist and political commentator. Hello, thanks for joining us, sir. And now, out of the White House, we saw threats of military invasion. Then we saw it followed by sanctions, and now we're seeing war games in Venezuela. If Donald Trump, stays as U.S. president, how far do you think this escalation of tensions will see it take?
It's difficult to say at the moment, but one thing is very clear, that the United States is hell-bent on regime change in Venezuela. President Trump has already threatened a military action against the government in Venezuela, a democratically elected government. They also imposed new sanctions, which means that Venezuelan government is not in a position to get new debt, new loans from foreign creditors. So I think there's an all-out attack on Venezuela. They're trying to change the government by putting military pressure, by creating more financials. Venezuelan economy is practically broken, and they need assistance. But if they're not able to get assistance, they'll get into further trouble. And I think Venezuela, being a small country, is being threatened by a superpower like United States with military action. They have no other way out but to be prepared for any eventuality. I hope, and I hope I'm right here, I don't see a possibility of actual war happening, an open war, but I can tell you, already covert operations are going on against Venezuelan government. U.S. has a very, very strong ties with Colombia. They are very old allies, very old military partners, and through that, they're trying to destabilize the government, and the situation is really, really very fragile at the moment. The possibility of an all-out a war breaking out are remote at the moment, but things are not looking good at all.
And in these latest sanctions out of Washington, who's going to hurt more, President Nicolas Maduro or people that are already standing in long lines for basically no commodities on store shelves?
Of course, the people of Venezuela will suffer because the country doesn't have much money. There's a shortage of food, there's a shortage of basic necessities. People have been standing in long queues trying to get basic things in life. I think by putting, I think the U.S. has a typical blueprint of toppling a regime, and that is to create artificial crisis, bring out people on the streets, make them so miserable that they revolt against the government. And that's what the U.S. is hoping for, create so much difficulty for the problem that they revolt against the government. There's already the country is very badly divided into factions. The government is facing a lot of problems, and I think if this situation continues, it will become more problem for President Maduro. But of course, the ordinary Venezuelans are going to suffer more because of these new U.S. sanctions imposed by President Trump.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Shoban Saxena, journalist and political commentator, joining us out of Sao Paulo, Brazil.